So let's move on to the second question. Do the criticism of Jesus against the Jewish elites amount to anti-Semitism? Jesus indeed used very strong words against the Jewish leaders, the Pharisees, the teachers of the law. When we look at it from the 21st century, it looks quite anti-Semitic to us. But for a person living in the first century, they might have heard it in a completely different way. I want to clarify this with three examples. Let's go to this verse from Matthew chapter 23, verse 33. So Jesus' comment on Jews as the brood of vipers. Snakes, brood of vipers, how can you escape being condemned to hell? It sounds so awful to hear. How can you call someone snakes and brood of vipers? It sounds so awful to hear, but let's hear them in its context. This verse in Matthew chapter 23, it comes in the chapter which contains 7 woes against the teachers of the law and Pharisees. Jesus was specifically critiquing the religious establishment of his day, of hypocrisy and spiritual superficiality. He was not condemning every Jew in Judea. He was not being anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish, but rather a critique of the religious malpractices of his day as he perceived them. Also, in saying these words, Jesus was speaking like the Jewish prophet Isaiah. Look at Isaiah chapter 59, verses 4 and 5. Verse 4, no one calls for justice. No one pleads his case with integrity. They rely on empty arguments and speak lies. They conceive trouble and give birth to evil. They hatch the eggs of vipers and spin a spider's web. Whoever eats their eggs will die, and when one is broken, an adder is hatched. Those are very strong words, as you can see. The reference of Jesus to the Jews as a brood of vipers is a subtle inner biblical reference to this passage in the book of Isaiah. Should we call Isaiah anti-Semitic for making these comments? They hatch the eggs of vipers. That's what Isaiah says. No, on the contrary, Isaiah truly cared about the spiritual well-being of the Jewish people. And that's the case with Jesus as well. Jesus stands in this prophetic tradition decrying hypocrisy and religious superficiality. Now let's go to the case number 2. Jesus told that the Jewish temple would be destroyed. We read about this in Matthew chapter 24, verses 1 and 2. Jesus left the temple and was walking away when his disciple came up to him to call his attention to its buildings. Do you see all these things, he asked? Truly I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down. Prediction of Jesus came true in AD 70 before the end of the same generation that heard these very words of Jesus. So Romans crushed the Jewish rebellion ferociously and destroyed the temple. The crown jewel of Jerusalem was burnt. During these tumultuous years of Jewish rebellion, the early Christians moved away from the city of Jerusalem as they recalled these very words of Jesus. Now, was Jesus anti-Semitic to predict the future? I don't think so. He was not instigating his disciples to take up weapons to destroy the Jewish temple. He didn't tell his disciples to join the enemies of Jews, that is the Romans, to attack and destroy the temple. If he said that, that would be anti-Semitic. Jesus said none of that. I want to give an example from the Jewish Bible, the Old Testament. Prophet Jeremiah prophesied that the glorious temple that King Solomon had built would be destroyed by the hand of the Babylonians. And it did happen. In the year 586 BC, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the temple and burned it. Was Jeremiah anti-Semitic because he made the prediction that the destruction of the temple would happen in the hands of the Babylonians? No, we don't consider Jeremiah as anti-Semitic. He was calling the people to draw near to God. So telling them of the consequences of their rejection and disobedience to the commandments of God. So God was extending his mercy through these prophets, through Jesus, to his own people. Now, Jesus was reminding his disciples not to be awed by the sight or the enormity of the temple. The huge temple of Herod would be destroyed one day. But Jesus said, for a time was coming for all nations to worship the Lord of life everywhere. Worship would become universal, beyond geographic locations and specific buildings. John chapter 4, verse 21. This is what Jesus said, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. So that's the reality of the new covenant under Jesus. Worship will become universal, where 2 or 3 gathers in my name, and I will be in their midst. Case number 3, let's go to Matthew chapter 27, verse 25. This is the most often repeated remark of anti-Semitism against Christianity. Verse 24, when Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hand in front of the crowd. I am innocent of this man's blood, he said. It is your responsibility. All the people answered, his blood is on us and on our children. To the reference, all the people here refer to all the Jews. That's the question. If you look at this passage carefully, Jesus never spoke these words. Jesus never said that his blood will be on the Jews or on their children. The disciples did not say that the blood guilt of killing Jesus will be on Jews for generations. But it is the crowd, the mob, that was under the spell of the religious elites. The same religious elites that Jesus critiqued strongly for their hypocrisy. And it's obvious why they wanted to kill Jesus. So when the mob said that his blood is on us and on our children, it was not an indication that all Jews in Judea came under the curse for killing Jesus. It is true that this verse has been misinterpreted and misapplied by fanatics that cared less for the genuine teachings of Christ or the biblical gospel. Those who engaged in such heinous acts did not do it because of the biblical teachings, but the contrary. They did it despite the biblical message. This verse has to be taken in the context of Jesus' own words and other teachings of Jesus. While Jesus was hanging on the cross, the very first words that came out of his mouth, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. Jesus prayed for that very murderous mob that was instigated by the Jewish elites and the Roman executioners that crucified him, that they would be forgiven for their merciless actions because they acted out of ignorance. Jesus forgave them and prayed for their forgiveness. Jesus also taught us Christians that we must pray for those who persecute us. Jesus exemplified his teaching when he prayed for his tormentors on the cross. And this is the Protestant view in general. Roman Catholic Church also has spoken very strongly against misapplying this verse. Pope Paul VI, in his declaration, where he wrote about the relationship of the church to the non-Christian religions, this is what he said. True, the Jewish authorities and those who followed their lead pressed for the death of Christ. Still, what happened in his passion cannot be charged against all the Jews without distinction, then alive, nor against the Jews of today. Although the church is the new people of God, the Jews should not be presented as rejected or accursed by God, as if this followed from the Holy Scriptures. The point is simple. Don't accuse Jews for killing Jesus. Anyone who does so, do it out of ignorance of the biblical teachings and the position of the wider Christian church.